Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we are going to be looking at Robert Todd Lincoln. And Chris, Robert Todd Lincoln, of course, maybe for our listeners, he's best known as the son of Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd Lincoln. But I think, Chris, Robert Todd Lincoln may have one of the most coincidental lives of almost anybody I have read about recently anyway, in that there's so many coincidences in his life. It's strange.
And I would also say that the story of Robert is one of the most inspirational, I guess, because you see the various opportunities this man has to be involved in so many things. But I also think it gives me and the listeners insight into the children of presidents. We don't talk about them a lot. We focus on the president and then, of course, the first lady. But I remember, with this president current and the previous president, a lot of attention has been drawn to their children. And the same thing with Robert. And many people have said that Robert doesn't really get acknowledged by historians because he is in the shadow of his father. And even Robert will say that as we talk a little bit later about him. And so I am so grateful to be able to talk about this individual today, because there is so much from his early life to his middle life and even to his death that impacted America. And it truly is history you didn't know but should. So I'm ready to get into it and talk about the life of Robert T. Lincoln.
Yeah, let's talk about Robert Todd Lincoln. He was born on August 1st, 1843 in Springfield, Illinois. Of course, like I said a minute ago, he's the son of Abraham Lincoln and his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln. He is the only one of Mary Todd Lincoln and Abraham Lincoln's children to reach adulthood. They had a total of 4 children in their marriage. Eddie Lincoln, who we know precious little about because apparently he died just a few weeks or months after he was born. There was Willie Lincoln, and anybody who knows anything about the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, Willie died, of course, while Lincoln was president, and it absolutely crushed Lincoln and Mary Todd Lincoln to have Willie die when he did. Of course, you had the Civil War and the pressures of that already going on, and now you have Willie dying. Then you have Tad Lincoln, who lived to be about 18, and then he died. But he actually outlived his father, Abraham Lincoln. So we come now to Robert Todd Lincoln, who, like I said, he's the only one of Mary Todd and Abraham Lincoln's children to make it to adulthood. And it's very interesting, Chris, and I don't know how much you may have on this, if anything at all. When you think about his relationship, the relationship that Robert had with his father, Abraham Lincoln, I think the implication that he gives is he didn't really have a close relationship with his father. His father was constantly gone, constantly busy, and he just didn't have a lot of time to spend with his son here, Robert Todd.
Yeah, you're right. He was, Abraham Lincoln was a lawyer. He was also a politician. And so he was constantly away from home, making political speeches, attending court. And one historian has even gone so far to say that Mary was a single mother. That is how bad it was. And that allows for Robert and Mary to really become close. Mary is probably closer to Robert during her husband's presidency and in his early life than, she is to Abraham Lincoln. She has a very close relationship. And I think that kind of adds a little bit, even, Robert goes and he studies. I think he goes to study in New England, and he eventually attends Harvard College. And, he is pretty much headed in the direction of going in the same direction as his father, right? To be a lawyer. And then the war comes. And along with the war, you have his father's presidency. And I think that that has a huge impact on his life, but also concerning the role of a son in coming into the Civil War, right? This is something that, we might think about if we pay attention to it. But here you have the president of the United States who is leading a nation during war. And he also has a child that is of fighting age. And there is a lot of debate as to whether Robert should stay in his studies and be a lawyer, or if Robert should go for the battlefield. And as you've already mentioned, detailing the siblings of Robert, Mary, the last thing she wants is for her son Robert to go to the battlefield, because she and Abraham had a difficult time, as you mentioned, with the loss of Willie. And I don't think, she even says, I can't bear another loss. I can't bear another sacrifice. And so I don't want my son going into the army. But then, Ray, you have what we see a lot today. You have reporters who start getting in on it, and they start advocating. It's like, wait, there's a problem here. You're asking these people to send their sons into battle and the brothers into battle, yet you have a son who is of age and he's hiding behind law books. So I think Abraham Lincoln, in addition to the pressure of the war, to the pressure of being a president and being a husband and a father and losing children, he has this decision to make. Do I send my son to war and possibly lose another child, or do I just let him continue to do law purposes? And Ray, he makes an interesting decision. He actually, what does he choose to do?
He goes into the army. He goes in a little late. He doesn't go in early in the war. And of course, that's going to bring criticism. It's funny, Chris, how the media doesn't change, how politicians don't change. And they, friend and foe alike, got involved attacking why, I don't know, attacking is the right word, but yeah, it is the right word. Attacking the Lincoln families. Why is your son Robert, who's perfectly capable of serving, why is he not serving when other people's sons of his age are? Is he being privileged? Type of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's where it really does go. But what happens, it does actually lead into, I guess we could say, maybe the first coincidence of Robert's life, because Lincoln says, fine, I'm going to put you in the war. I'm going to put you in the army, but you're going to be a captain, and you're going to be a captain on Ulysses Grant's staff, which basically means you're going to be right beside him. Therefore, you're not going to get close to the war as far as the actual battle, but you're going to be able to see the battle as it takes place, and you'll get to learn a lot. And Ray, that first coincidence is that Robert Lincoln was actually a witness to the surrender from General Lee to Ulysses S. Grant that effectively ended the Civil War. So all because of this public pressure to get him in the war, Lincoln puts him in the war, and he just so happens to witness one of the most iconic historical events in American history.
Yeah, and at the time of his death, he was actually in 1926, which we'll talk about later, he was actually the only person who was at that event, the surrender by Grant. He was the only person at that event that was still alive in 1926 when he died. So yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of coincidences. One more coincidence here, by the way. Apparently, he is at a train track. Okay, he's standing at a train station, and of course, if you've ever been on a train, you go to the train track and you stand there and wait. And there was a group of people standing there waiting around the train track, and Robert Lincoln stumbled somehow, and the train was coming up the track. A young man grabbed Robert Lincoln's shirt and pulled him back. That young man was Edwin Booth, the son of the man who, not too long into the future, would assassinate Abraham Lincoln, Robert Lincoln's father. So here you have Edwin Booth, the son of John Wilkes Booth, saving the life of Robert Lincoln, the son of Abraham Lincoln. And I think Robert knew who he was because, John Wilkes Booth was something of a famous actor at the time, but I don't think Edwin Booth knew who Robert was.
It's just one of those things about history that's just like, wow, how you put those two together. Because I remember reading the story, and the historian that I read it from just wrote about it in very eloquent details, but was just talking about they locked eye contact. Like there was a moment there in which this cosmic interplay of one day soon our names will be synonymous with each other, just as they are in this moment. So, I think that's a fascinating story, once again, of how Robert just puts himself right in the middle of historical events. And it's pretty cool.
By accident. It's not like he sat there and planned it out.
Absolutely.
He ended there accidentally.
Think about this. You've got Robert Lincoln, who his life will span the most innovative and dynamic era in all of American history. He is witnessing firsthand a lot of transformation. We're going from an agrarian revolution to an industrial revolution. We're actually he's born in a tavern that's got no indoor plumbing. It's got no electricity. And yet when he dies, he's dying in this opulent, beautiful 500-acre mansion that he built. So he is living in one of the most important times in American history. And he is truly eyewitness to so many of these different events, as you're mentioning, and so he has that experience. The Civil War is over. And then, talk about what happens next to his father, because, Dad wanted him to go see a play, I think at Ford's Theater one night. And for some reason, Robert, I think maybe he was tired or something, and he just decided, hey, I think I'll just hang out. And so Mary and Abraham go to that Ford's Theater for some play. And I think you said the actor's name was John Wilkes Booth?
John Wilkes Booth. They go see a play called Our American Cousin. It's a comedy. They go there to Ford's Theater. And I believe, Chris, you've been to Ford's Theater. You have.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. It's rebuilt. It's not the exact thing, right. But yeah, just being able to sit in there and they have a really good museum that I thought the museum was a whole lot better than Ford's Theater, because they actually have the original flag. They have the original, I forget what they call it, the casket thing that they put him in and traveled, as they put on the trains. That's there. But no, our listeners, that's in Washington, D.C. It's really a good place to go. Some really good history. But, Ray, I think if you think through that, Robert Lincoln wasn't at the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. But as soon as he found word, he was right there by his father's bedside.
And he was there the next morning when his father died, April 15, 1865. Of course, he had been taken across the street by that particular point. Abraham Lincoln had been. After all of this occurs, the Civil War, he's been at Harvard Law School. The Civil War sort of puts a temporary hold on that. But he goes to Chicago, and he finishes his law degree, I guess you could say, at the University of Chicago. And there he is admitted to the bar to practice law there in Chicago. And, Chris, he opens his own law firm, and he starts working as a lawyer there in Chicago. And it is, I guess it's because of who his father is and all this. 2 presidents later, of course, you had Abraham Lincoln when he was assassinated. Andrew Johnson becomes president and then basically serves 1 full term. And then you have 2 terms with Ulysses S. Grant. So The third president after Abraham Lincoln, Rutherford Hayes, actually offers Robert Lincoln a position as Secretary of State in 1877. But Lincoln turns it down. And I find it very interesting that there was talk throughout the mid to late 19th century, even into the early 1900s, of Robert Todd being a candidate for president, for vice president, Secretary of State, and all these other positions that is talked about. And he only accepted one, and that was as Secretary of War under James Garfield in 1881. He accepted that position, but I think if my notes are right, I think that's the only one of the positions that he was offered that he actually accepted. And I read that he really didn't like the limelight. He wanted to be a lawyer. He wanted to do his thing. He didn't necessarily want to be Abraham Lincoln's son out following in his father's footsteps. He wanted to sort of do his own thing. And I think that's very admirable.
Well, it's very admirable, but people didn't like it.
Oh, no.
And they didn't like the fact that he was private and he was confidential and he kept things to himself. You're right. He was actually nominated to be president 5 times by the Republican Party. And each time he said, no, I will not do it. And the reason he said he didn't want to do it is he said, quote, the presidential office is but a gilded prison. I mean, that's how he saw it. And I think you go back to his early days, he never saw his dad.
Yeah.
And not only did he not see his dad growing up because his dad was always away on political assignments, then he experienced his dad doing the war and the stress and the grief that happened with that. But then his dad lost his life because of the presidency. So I think, Robert is like, I want nothing to do with it. And you're right. The only thing he wanted, was the Secretary of War. I think he'll also become like Benjamin Harrison's minister to Britain. Also, he'll take that on. But,
right.
It's kind of like things that are not out there, things that are not popular. I'll do those. But he's a Victorian era gentleman. He is one who skews the limelight, and he doesn't want to accept a call to public duty if it's going to impinge on his family. He does have a family now. He's got 3 children. Once again, he sees what happens when he was growing up. He doesn't want to mirror that of his dad. So I think he is, as you said, admirable. He's trying to make changes. Work's not going to influence all that I do, but I'm going to put my family first. And so that's what he would do. He said, I honorably decline these announcements and these assignments because I want to spend time with my family. And I think that's important. And, it adds a lot to his character.
Yeah. And he, like you said, he becomes Secretary of War in 1881 under James Garfield. And then we have a very interesting turn of events. I believe we already did a podcast episode on the assassination of James Garfield. So I hope our listeners, if that's something you're interested in, will go back and re-listen to that episode. Robert Todd Lincoln, though he was not necessarily present in the stall when his father was murdered, he is present at the assassination of President James Garfield, or the shooting of Garfield. Garfield, of course, was at the train station there in D.C. He's waiting on a train, and Charles Gutiot, who was something of a disgruntled office seeker / unstable person who thought God had told him to kill Garfield, shoots Garfield there in the presence of Robert Todd Lincoln. That had to bring back memories, even though he may not have been in the room, right there when his father was shot. But just the idea of here's another president being shot in my lifetime. In my lifetime, here's another one that's being shot. Now, of course, Garfield does not die there at the train station. He hangs on for several months before finally succumbing to infection that was brought about by the medical team that was attending to him, not sanitizing their equipment, not washing their hands, and thus it got infected and Garfield died. I believe it was Gutiot who said, when they were charging him with the murder of Garfield, he said, "Look, I shot Garfield, but the doctors killed him." And there's a level of truth to that's exactly what happened. So here we have, he was present at the death of when his father died. Now we have a second president that he is an eyewitness to this particular president's assassination.
That's a lot for one person to take on. But while he is taking on that as well, he's also having to take care of his mom.
Yeah.
His mom has already suffered so much grief with Willie, passing away in the office, and the other children. But also the loss of her husband. That assassination must have been extremely difficult. And, Robert has now been a part of 2 assassinations in some form or fashion.
Mm-hmm.
But his mom at home is really experiencing severe mental illness. And so what Robert does is Robert has to make the unconscionable decision of sending his mom to a sanatorium. He even had to take control of her money and all of her accounts. He had to hide it from her because she wasn't really thinking clearly, and she was wasting it and doing all of these things. And so he had to do what he thought was necessary to keep his mother safe from herself, but also from others. And so I can't imagine the mental anguish he's going through, dealing with that.
And she didn't make it easy. She was not one to go quietly to the old age home and sit there and knit. That was not her thing. In fact, at one point, I believe she works with a lawyer to leak a story, basically trying to get people to see that she wasn't insane and it was just her mean son. So that early good relationship that you talked about Mary Todd and Robert Todd having, that was gone by this point. She was not a happy camper with her son.
All the way until her death. I mean, this is not something that just lasted for a week. I mean, calling him a liar, all of those things. So you have, and during this time, let's keep in mind, Robert's not just sitting at home, managing these assassinations and his mom, but he is also at this point the chairman of one of the most powerful businesses in the United States, the Pullman Car Company, which is a fascinating topic for another podcast. But he is in charge of this, train car company that is extremely very important to society, very much needed. So he is battling a full-time job. He has also got his own family. He's dealing with his mother. He is dealing with the emotional and mental effects of what he has witnessed. And then add to that, Ray, the unbelievable happens in September of 1901 when he meets up with his friend, William McKinley. And who would have thought that the next events could have happened with Robert there?
Yeah, he is on his way. Robert Lincoln is on his way to Buffalo, to New York, where they were having the Pan American Exposition there that year. And President William McKinley was present there and was going to have a receiving line. And a young man came through the line and shot McKinley. And now Robert Todd was not in the building when it occurred. He was still on his way. And when he arrived at the Pan American Exposition, he is informed that the president had been shot. So now he is his father, President of the United States, shot, dead. Garfield, a president he was serving, shot. A few months later, dead. Now you have a third president, William McKinley, shot, dead. And Robert Todd Lincoln is in the vicinity, let's say, when all of these things happen. Now, I don't know about you, Chris, and I don't know about our listeners, but if I was president of the United States and Robert Todd Lincoln was still alive, I would issue an executive order that he would be sent to Alaska and never allowed to come out of Alaska until I was no longer president.
Yeah, he actually turned down future invitations from presidents, and he was quoted as saying that there is a, quote, certain fatality about presidential functions when I am present. And so, I mean, he knew there's something going on, although
he was like
does
a
make
bad
one
luck
more
charm.
appearance. Yeah, he's a really bad luck charm, but he does make one more appearance, and that is in 1922 when they are dedicating the Lincoln Memorial, and he does show up for that. And in attendance, I think, were President Warren Harding and former President Taft. I'm curious if they said don't get near the guy or have him sit somewhere else, or
Get him in the back.
Yeah, there's no record that they said anything, but we've done podcasts on Taft before.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty confident if we did a little more research, he probably said something, because he's one who didn't.
It's probably false to history that he probably didn't write it down, though. So
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have the audio tapes of those discussions. You just sort of wish where's Richard Nixon when you need him, recording presidential conversations.
But it's interesting. But here's the thing, Ray. That's really the only quote that we have of how Robert handled all of these things, because Robert was a private man and he did not give access to anything. He didn't even write memoirs. He didn't write, he burned letters from his mom and dad. And he quotes or says the reason that he did it was to protect, the character of his mom and of his dad. He wanted to be a preserver and a protector and a defender, but he didn't give access to reporters, which is why I think people were like, we don't like you because you're not telling us the good stuff. In today's society, when we hear something, we immediately want to jump on Twitter or social media. We don't want to just know what's happening. We want to know the intimate details of how it's happening. And Robert T. Lincoln would not be a fan of TikTok or Twitter or social media. He would not do that because he was an intensely private man. And he said, my parents' lives and my lives are to be private, to the point he gave everything to the Library of Congress. He said, I'll give you my father's documents. I'll give you some stuff that I have. I'll give them to you. However, nobody can see them until after 21 years that I've been dead. And some people say the reason that he did that is because there was this reporter who was harassing him for papers and really trying to give him a hard time. Right. And so he knew he'd be dead after 21 years. And that's why he put 21 years, so that one reporter wouldn't be able to get access. Who knows if it's true, but it's still pretty interesting story.
The coincidences do not end with the death of McKinley. The coincidences do not even end with the death of Robert Todd Lincoln. He dies in July of 1926 there in Vermont at a summer retreat. But then the issue is, where was he going to be buried? And of course, he had always told people that he wanted to be buried near his father. He wanted to be buried there in Springfield, Illinois. But he was not. Instead, he was buried at Arlington National Cemetery because his widow, his wife, said that, and this I think is fully in agreement with what he had said, when he was when we were thinking about he didn't want necessarily to follow in his father's footsteps and all that kind of stuff. Basically, she said, look, he was his own man. He doesn't need to be buried in the shadow of his father. He didn't want to live in the shadow of his father, and he doesn't need to be buried in the shadow of his father. So he is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. And Chris, I've never been to Arlington National Cemetery, but I understand that his grave can be seen from John F. Kennedy's grave and vice versa, that they're that close. So again, coincidence? Here he is right near in death, President John F. Kennedy. And Chris, one more thing. If you think about it, we've had a number of presidents die in office. You can think about William Henry Harrison. You can think about Zachary Taylor, Warren Harding. You know, we've had, what, 4 presidents assassinated, right? You had Lincoln, you had Garfield, you had McKinley and Kennedy. Am I missing one? The assassination list?
Not assassinated. There were several attempted, but you're right on this.
Robert Todd Lincoln was associated in some way with 3 out of the 4 of our nation's assassinated presidents.
And add to the story that you just shared with Kennedy.
Yeah. Yeah, the
He's
4th
got
one's
some
very near.
coincident right there.
Yeah. What an amazing story Robert Todd Lincoln is. Absolutely amazing.
But I'll go back to something you said. He didn't want to be buried in the shadow of his father. And I really think that Robert felt that he always lived in his father's shadow. We don't know about Robert Todd Lincoln. We don't talk about him. And look at all of this that he did. He was a captain of industry. He was up there with the Rockefellers. I mean, and, he was the Carnegies. I mean, but I have this quote that's in my head about Robert Lincoln. And he said this. He said, I felt that I always lived in my father's shadow because, quote, no one wanted me for Secretary of War. They wanted Abraham Lincoln's son. No one wanted me for president of the Pullman Company. They wanted Abraham Lincoln's son.
Yeah.
And this is the problem with history, is that we focus on the man, the myth, the legend, as people would like to say, Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
But look at his descendants. Look at what Robert did. Because Robert truly made a difference in America through his work at the Pullman, car company, but also, I think, in his work of preserving Lincoln's legacy by keeping things private. And I think there's a lot to say. People in today's society would probably reject that argument because they want to know it all. But I have to go back to this man who said, I really believed that it's important to maintain a legacy of my family. You just don't need all the junk out there. Yeah, and I have a lot of respect for him.
Absolutely. Tons of respect. Well, Chris, I enjoyed working with you on this particular episode. Look forward to many more episodes to come of history you didn't know but should. Make sure to share this podcast with your family and friends. And Chris, I think they can find us almost anywhere.
Absolutely. Whether it's through iHeartRadio, Spotify, Sounder, Stitcher, any place where you can find podcasts, make sure that you look up history you didn't know but should. And you'll find 2 history instructors who just love talking about random things about history and allowing our listeners to plug in and to become involved in learning some really cool aspects of life.
Yeah. And until next time, I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
We will talk to you later.